These webinars are done by our awesome training working group folks who I'll let introduce themselves as they come on board, but just a quick agenda of what we're going to talk about today. We'll start with layer handling, a little bit of advanced editing techniques, then go into filters and selection, followed by conflict resolution, and finally a little bit of a deep dive into relations. So yeah, hopefully those of you, I know there was a request to try to get this agenda out there early, and we had it, we just didn't have a great way to add it anywhere. I think we used to have it in our Eventbrite when we used Eventbrite for registration, but now that we've moved to Zoom, yeah, I just don't think we've found a good home for this agenda. So yeah, apologies to those of you who were hoping to see this in advance. But yeah, hopefully those topics are something you're interested in. And with that, I won't get into my relation slides. I'll hand it over to, I believe, Michael starts us off.
Okay, so welcome everyone. I'm Michael. I'm currently the chair of the training working group. So Russ, could you stop sharing your screen, please? Okay.
Yeah, you should have it now.
So share it. Okay. So okay. So you should see my JOSM here right now. And during my talk about layer handling, I'll mainly be talking about the upper right corner of that JOSM, all the layers in here, how you get there, and what you can do with that. So, okay, so is there any issue? Well, Russ, can you confirm if my screen is visible?
Yeah, I have your JOSM.
Okay. So as because I've seen someone raised a hand. Do we have something in the chat? See? No, not yet. Okay. So as TM4 is fairly new, the new release of our tasking manager, I think I'd like to take the opportunity not to walk you through the tasking manager, but just to use it to get something meaningful into these layers, because there are quite a few remarks I'd like to make there. So that's how it looks like when you start it. And if you go to Explore Projects, you've got that familiar window where you see all those projects. So if you are looking for some specific projects, you can use a couple of filters. You can set the difficulty level. We've got a few more filters in here. For instance, let's say, well, somehow I'm a fan of the Philippines, so why not look for projects in the Philippines and apply that. And so if you narrow down things a little bit, you will notice this bar here at the bottom of each project description. The light gray one here is the number of tasks available for mapping. The dark gray ones is the number of tasks available for validation. And the red portion here shows how many have been validated. So that means the first 4 projects here in this list are not good for mapping any longer, because they've all been completely mapped and are validated to various degree. So if you're looking for something for mapping, for instance, if you're organizing a mapathon, something with a large portion of light gray would be a good candidate. So why not choose this one? And there is one big difference compared to the previous version, Tasking Manager 3. When you were still on TM3, you could start selecting any tasks here from that grid right now. In order to get there, you have to hit this contribute button, but it's a good idea not to do that right now, but to scroll down a little further, not just read the description, but mainly read whether you may map or validate it all. Teams and permissions pop up here. So this is the most relaxed setting. All users can map, all users can validate, or it might be that validation is, for instance, restricted to some validation team members. So good idea to have a look here first before you select a task and then figure out you can't take that. Once you hit that contribute button, things start to be more familiar. We've got the task instructions in here as usual, and we've got the task grid here. And well, this time, well, it tells me resume mapping because I've selected the task I want to talk about right now a while ago. So resume mapping, in this case, my editor preset is JOSM. So this means once I say resume mapping, it will fill JOSM. So here we are. Let me just get back to this. Instructions here allows you to view the instructions again. And this is something which happens right often. If you're going to work on a task which has been set up a while ago, it will tell you to use digital globe imagery. And for those who haven't noticed that, the company Digital Globe has been acquired by Maxar in the meantime, so the digital globe layers now are called Maxar. So this would mean Maxar, for instance, is what is recommended here. Okay, so well, we've got the task boundary, which typically we're not going to need that urgently when mapping with JOSM. It's much more relevant in ID, so we can just skip that here. We've got the OSM data, and we've got an imagery layer, which you, as usual, can get from the imagery menu. So typically, this is the vertical stack, which means data is always on the top, imagery is below. So if we zoom in a little bit further, we see, well, there have been quite a few number of buildings already mapped, but well, they are not perfectly aligned. So if we zoom in a little further, then we can see, comparing it with that distance bar here, we seem to be offset something like 5 meters. Well, 5 meters is nothing to really worry about. That's pretty usual. Even in times of GPS, anything with a 1-digit deviation in terms of meters is well within the accuracy limits of even a modern GPS unit. So that is usual, and we just have to find a way how to deal with that. Well, might compare it with Bing imagery, but this one even doesn't fit perfectly with Bing. So, well, if we would like to find out more about where are we really, and that would be important if, for instance, we did detect an imagery offset of something like 40 or 50 meters, then one way is to search for GPS track layers. Well, unfortunately, in most areas where HOT is active, GPS tracks aren't that many here, but we can give it a try. That means in this case, maybe it helps even zoom out a little bit. Go back to this download button, and then you say not the OpenStreetMap data, but say raw GPS data, and download them. And this will result in a new layer, the downloaded GPX data. You can see, well, there is obviously one main road where people have been using a GPS. And if we go down there and alternate a little bit between the Maxar and the Bing layer, then, well, there isn't a big difference. Well, there's 5 meters, but they are not that bad here within this GPS limit. If that GPS doesn't look so brightly colored, you can right-click on that GPX data layer, and in this context menu, you've got Customize Color, where you can set a color which gives you a reasonable contrast to your data layer and also to the imagery. And you can also say Customize Track Drawing, where you can increase, for instance, the width of the lines if they don't stand out so clearly. So what I personally prefer is, unless there's a real bunch of lines here, I usually move them up. So as I said to you, this here is a vertical stack. I mean, the data layer is always on top of the imagery, which of course does make sense. And the GPX layer by default is below the data. But we can use these arrows here to put it up and get it here on top of the data layer. Lets it stand out more clearly. Because if I switch off the imagery layers here for a moment and the data layer, then you can see, oops, there is a little more here. These are not real tracks in terms of lines, but just individual data points. And if you want to compare them with your imagery, well, you hardly see them. What comes to your rescue? You got it, the context menu for the GPX data. If we go back to customized track drawing, there is an option here, draw large GPS points, which is helpful as well because now you can see those points here. Not too clearly, but they are clearly visible. It might also help to get back to this Maxar imagery layer and for instance to reduce the colorfulness or even reduce here or increase the gamma so that it's a bit darker. And then you get the feeling here, okay, you see the GPX points more clearly. So there are a couple of controls here, for instance, particularly the opacity and the gamma are certainly worth to play with in order to correct the presentation of these images. While we're talking about these layers, there is another layer which isn't that widely known. And for instance, if you're working on a project where you want to draw waterways, let me switch over to this one here. And well, choose Bing. Let's say you have a situation like this, and you would like to map this waterway. As we all know, waterways have a direction, the direction flow, but it's not, even if you zoom out a little bit, you don't really get the idea where this waterway flows. And there is one layer which is available from the imagery menu, and that is the open cycle map layer. And that is interesting because it contains contour lines. And you could even go back here and reduce the opacity a little bit if you want to see anything here below. But you can clearly see that, well, the terrain falls from southwest down to northeast. So that is obviously the direction every water body must take. So in this way, you would have to map it here from the southwest towards the northeast. So particularly when mapping waterways, the open cycle map layer is quite a good indicator, and it also can help you understand why, for instance, a road is so crooked as it looks, might be a hilly area. So, and then adjusting this to the required opacity so that you still see anything here below is certainly also quite helpful. Well, I promised to tell you something about how to deal with this imagery mismatch here. So what can we do? We said we should use, well, it tells us to use digital globe, in our case, Maxar now. And why? Well, if I switch on Maxar, I can clearly see it's way newer because there are buildings pretty new which do not exist on Bing. So quite a good idea to use the new imagery layer. And also if we move around a little bit here with, that's the project selected here. And if we move on here a little bit and switch between these imagery layers, you can even see this is Bing. Lots of open terrain here. If we see more current Maxar layer tells us, well, there are lots of buildings. Now, if we zoom in, we see, well, there are a couple of these buildings mapped, but doesn't look so right as far as alignment is concerned. Then you simply use either the imagery offset, or if you have it here in your toolbar, it's this button. And well, now that I've got a couple of imagery layers here active, I select the one I want to deal with. Of course, I don't have any figures at hand for the offset, but I can simply use my mouse here and to drag that here onto previous mapping here onto, so that it matches best with this imagery. And I see, well, the offset is a few meters. Not much, but now I have a sound basis in order to continue mapping all those remaining buildings here. So we typically should go for least effort. I mean, if you detect any deviation between previously mapped objects and an imagery which is below 10 meters, then there is no absolute truth, as this is all well within the accuracy of any GPS unit. So least effort means if there were just a few houses mapped, I could easily drag them to their location on the recommended imagery. As you see here, you don't really want to correct the locations of all these mapped objects. So least effort in this case means, well, probably they have been mapped from a previous edition of the Bing imagery. So let's just adapt this imagery we want to use, the Maxar layer, to these here. You might have heard of an imagery offset database. This, well, is, I think, rather in use for Bing, but not so much in use for Maxar. If we'd like to see, well, we wanted to use Bing for mapping, and we can see that even these objects are not perfectly aligned with Bing. We could try to figure out if someone already entered something into this offset database. That means you would say get imagery offset, or I've got that here on my toolbar as well. And then it, well, it sees what is my current imagery layer. And then it scans the database and figures out, well, there is an imagery offset which was created a little while ago at a place 2.3 kilometers away. Well, we could give it a try with a 2.8 meter offset. So that would mean you simply click on it and oops, well, doesn't look bad. So that imagery offset obviously applied to the images here in this area as well. And likewise, you could use your Maxar imagery offset, which you obtained by shifting the imagery and store it into that database so that other people might simply look for it and use it. So the point with imagery and imagery alignment, the main point here is we need to have a consistent map. That means objects have to be on the proper sides of highways and waterways, and of course highways have to be away from any houses and not intersect with them. So this is the main goal, but whether a house is really located here or maybe 2 meters away isn't that important for a consistent map. So always go least effort. Before you start mapping, make sure that existing imagery and existing mapping matches, and then start mapping with this consistent setup. And well, how do these inconsistencies come about? Well, if we use Bing, if we use Maxar, these are worldwide layers which are stitched together from numerous images taken at various points in time. And so the stitching process isn't always without any flaws. And well, so you can even see inconsistencies within one such task. For instance, my favorite here, my favorite on Bing is this one. But they are not always that obvious, the mismatches. Well, to be honest, I wouldn't want to sit in any of these two cars here, but well, if we look again here at the scales, well, this is just an offset of something like 5 meters. That can happen in imagery processing. So if that happens to be one of your tasks, we'll have to realign the imagery once you're working here in the left part and once you're working here in the right part. So always have a look out for that. So, well, we've talking about all those different layers here, how you can arrange them here, how you can adjust their presentation in terms of opacity, for instance, and as well as color and size of the points for GPX layers, and also giving you some hints on how to deal with imagery offset. So that's basically for the first part, and I think we should try to see if there are some questions.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I don't think there were any questions specific to the topics at hand. Yeah, we got a couple of comments. The contribute term on the button was confused for a financial contribution. So yeah, thank you, Stephen, for pointing that out. It didn't even cross my mind that somebody might confuse those, but it makes perfect sense that it would be confusing. So yeah, I'll take that back to the development team and the designers to see if there's another term we can use or something that makes it a little clearer. And then I was just looking through our chat. I don't think there were any real questions there about, I guess, yeah, the translation of the video into French. Yeah, we're definitely not going to be translating as we go along tonight, but when I get the YouTube video posted, I always turn on the ability for the community to do the captions. So yeah, I'm sure that if you have if you want to do it yourself or have a team of folks that would want to translate for us, we would welcome the captions to be translated. And John just asked a question. User don't know how to start a project. So I assume you're asking how to actually create a project for your own, and that we have so many people that use our tasking manager. We're pretty restrictive in who we give those rights to. So this is a multi-answer question. The tasking manager itself is open source, so you're more than welcome to host your own version of the tasking manager. That's probably the most difficult answer. The second answer is we have lots of people that would create the project for you if it's just a one time want to map my neighborhood or do a mapping project for a school or something like that. We can definitely find you somebody that can do that for you. Or there's two ways to become your own project creator. One is through the activation working group, but that's we're not looking for people to just create projects that they want to do. That's for creating projects that are for disaster when a disaster happens, and we have a whole protocol for sizing up an incident and making sure it's something that's that we want to put our resources into. And then the last one is we now don't onboard new project managers. We only onboard new organizations. So if you represent an organization that's not already represented on the tasking manager, then I'm happy to talk to you and talk you through becoming a new organization. Jeffrey, who's one of the panelists tonight, is also the main trainer for new organizations. So I kind of do the initial talking to you of whether you're a good fit for our tasking manager, or there's other instances like the JOSM version. There's other versions of the tasking manager out there for various countries, Indonesia, Colorado, Colombia, the US has one. Yes, so we can kind of find you a better home if the HOT tasking manager isn't your or isn't the best place for you, or we get you on to Jeffrey, who does an onboarding with your organization and gets you set up for success. So yeah, sorry, it's not a real easy answer, but I hope that is a thorough answer and gets you the information you need to make the next steps. And yeah, just either ping me directly in the chat, or you can follow up with me later if you want to pursue it. Or if you need to find somebody. Go ahead.
Just get back a little while, because there are two questions in the Q&A window. I'd like to quickly answer, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So let me get back to my screen and to my JOSM. So the first one was, how do you detect the imagery vintage? Well, unfortunately, right now this only works for Bing. Right now, this is Bing imagery, and there is, if you click anywhere where is when there are no data, there is a context menu, and the lowest entry here is show tile info. And then they've got a capture date, which, well, isn't too informative because it says sometime between, well, late 2009 and mid 2016. In many cases, it's a bit more specific and narrows that down to maybe half a year or so. But unfortunately, this information here is only available for Bing. Digital Globe once had a website where they put up the vintage dates of their premium and standard layers. For Maxar, this is not yet available, but I talked to people from Maxar at a conference last year, and they promised that this is on their agenda. So let's hope they get something back here. And well, yeah, second question was about how to configure these toolbar here. You simply click anywhere in the right. There is Configure Toolbar, and here in the right part, you've got well, everything which is available. So, for instance, your download data in current view is something which is not available as a standard. It's this icon here, so which means you simply move to an area which is not currently part of your downloaded data. You're interested in that, simply click on that icon, and that's added to your current layer. So that means if you want to have anything in here, you can simply click on that here, add the selected object to the current data set, which is your current selection in here. And basically, you have access to all menu items. So for instance, also to all the presets. So if there's a preset, maybe you're pretty, well, what I did here is I added, for instance, the buildings preset, because that's something you need pretty often. You can select anything in here and add it to your custom toolbar. So, yes, and these imagery offsets, for instance, of course, are here in the imagery menu. So customizing that is useful. You will notice after some time which are the functions you will use pretty often. So put them here on the menu and below your menu here in this taskbar, and then you have quick access. Okay, back to you, Russ.
Yes, so yeah, thanks, Michael. I haven't typed out that last answer yet, so if you want to also type it in, then I think that's how we can get it to everybody else, and they can see the question as well. And if you can't hear, it's raining really pretty hard here, so I'm sorry if I'm drowned out by the sound of giant raindrops on a tin roof. But yeah, moving along, we have Ralph up next. Let me just real quick, let's see if there were any other questions that we missed before moving on. Yeah, John, I'll get you links to things, and the Mapillary plugin. Yeah, I have used the Mapillary plugin. I wouldn't say it's part of my normal repertoire, but does any other panelists use it very often?
Well, I haven't used it. Well, maybe I used it once, but typically no.
Yeah, so I mean, I would say it's another way to validate. I guess where I would see it being most helpful is if you're trying to validate like street names or addresses, those kind of things that you kind of need to see from the ground to have an idea. So I could see it being used for validation in those instances, but yeah, I don't really use it yeah, on a regular basis. It's kind of the same thing. Like I actually take mapillary photos when there's like new construction, so that if if I map the things and then people, it's not in the satellite imagery, at least there's sort of the other on the ground photo of mapillary showing like a new business or a new construction, those kind of things. So yeah, hopefully that helps answer the question. And with that, I think, Ralph, you are up next with the advanced editing. Am I correct there?
Yes, thanks, Russ. Can you hear me fine?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Right. Okay, folks, I'm going to start my screen share, and I'll be going through some of the shortcut keys used in mapping to help speed up your mapping, and also complex buildings and things like that. So here we go. Let's see if I can get my screen sharing up. Okay, now hopefully you'll be able to see a panel that shows you the shortcut keys. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, lovely. Do you guys want to do a quick screenshot of this so that you can save it and look at it later? I will be using the various keys and explaining as I go along. Some of those we know, like square buildings is Q, the building tool is B, the selection tool is S, and the line tool is A. Those are pretty common used, and you will notice I will call out the keys as I use them so that you get the idea of how I'm actually doing the mapping, rather than having to click on the various icons to get my things. You then see things like the Extrude Tool, Alt-R for set the building to a rectangle, building to a tool, to a circle. Those are quick, easy ways, certainly if you're doing African villages where you have both round and square buildings all lumped together. I'll show you how to unglue nodes or merge nodes, because those become very, very handy when you're trying to fix up and correct mapping. Combining two sections of way into one. So all of these rotate objects, scale, resize objects. All of these are very useful tools to speed up your mapping. Right, I'm going to stop sharing now while I change my screen and then come back to you. Right, hopefully you have my Bing on your screen.
Perfect.
Right. First of all, I'm going to start off with something that some people have a bit of confusion with. It's quite important for certainly when we go into disaster areas to find out what's been damaged and what hasn't been damaged to make roads passable. It's also important in back countries, rural areas where heavy rainfall can make roads impassable, where rivers and roads cross. So this is an important factor that we need to have. So I'm going to go into, yeah, okay, I'm going to take us to a little spot in Africa. This is a major river called the Caledon River. And we're first of all going to discuss, now there are three types of crossings. There's the bridge, which everyone is familiar with and knows, that goes over a river. Then there is a culvert where the road is level and the waterway goes through a pipe or a concrete conduit that goes underneath the road. And then there's a third way, which is the ford, where the river runs, or the road runs through the river and out the other side. You can understand that a culvert can be overrun and the road gets flooded. You can understand that a ford can be too fast flowing for cars and vehicles to cross through. In many cases, bridges is by far the safer way. So let's take a look. This is your normal bridge. You can see that it goes over the river. If I click on this, it is a bridge, yes, and it should always have layer 1. I'll explain that when I'm actually drawing them, how to work out what the layers are. But by understanding that, it's important for you to understand before you start using presets, so that you can make sure that the preset has done it correctly. So I'm going to switch this off so that you can see that there is a very definite distinction. You can see where a bridge usually starts and goes over the river and where a bridge usually ends. So these help you to decide what is the actual length of that bridge. And you can see the bridge doesn't stop at the edge of the water. It actually goes further in, which anchors it to solid ground. So please remember that when you're drawing the bridges, that you take it to either side of the river and the extent of the bridge, as you can see has been done with this one. Now, let's see, I'm going to see whether I can show you, here we are. Here I am seeing a bridge. Sometimes you can see there's a different surface to the road. Sometimes the surface is the same, but you can see a shadow, which shows that this is raised above the river. Now, okay, first we need to have a river here. So I'm going to quickly draw a river in so that you can see that. I press A on my keyboard. Remember shortcut keys? I press A on my keyboard. My cursor changes immediately. I can then draw in, press S to select. That's selected. I add a layer, and this is going to be Waterway, river. Okay, and I have a Waterway river. There we are. Now, I've identified that the bridge starts here and ends over there. So I use my A tool and I put a node at the one part of the point, press escape, put a node at the other end of the bridge, press escape, press S to select the one, hold down the shift key, select the second one, and I press P, which then segments the road. I just allow the history to remain on the outer part, okay. And having done that, I now select the one node. You can see this is together. So those have been separated. So I click on this section of the bridge now, and I go to my tags and I add, because what I want to add here now is to say what it is. So it is bridge, and bridge is yes. So bridge yes, and I say okay, and you can see now that my highway and surface is still there, but it now says bridge yes. But a bridge goes up over the waterway. The waterway is at ground level, The bridge is raised above it. That's why you have a shadow. So that has to be a layer 1 on the bridge, because the bridge goes over the river. So I will add layer 1. Okay. And I press OK, and I now have layer 1. Now, when I do a validation of that, the validation will see it as correct because the road and the river are not at the same layer. But the result is there's no clash here, so I don't need a node on the river and bridge intersection. Remember that there is no node on the intersection there. It is either side because of the difference in the layering. Right. I'm now going to look for a chance. Let's just see here. Okay. Here we are. We can see that there's no difference in the road at all. The road is perfectly level. There's no change in the structure or size. But we can see down here that there are little concrete culverts that allow this river to go through. Can you see that? That is a clear indication of what we're looking for. You can actually see that it's inset from the normal range of the soft shoulder across there. This is an embankment actually where the road runs across, and that's a culvert underneath. So let's just put the river in. So A on my keyboard, then just quickly add escape. Sorry, I haven't got that switched on. So select, add, and I already have a waterway here, so I select that and press enter. I press enter again, and I can get that to come up. So I can do more than one entry into my tags simply by pressing the enter key after having selected it. Now, in this case, the culvert is not on the road, the culvert is on the river because the river is going underneath. So we move a node to the beginning of the culvert and a node to the beginning of the culvert. I then press my S key, so I'm selecting one node. I hold my shift key and I select the second node. I press P on my keyboard to separate that. I select the separated piece and I add tunnel. And tunnel is a culvert. Okay, so I press OK, and I now have that as tunnel is a culvert. But a culvert goes underneath the road. So we need to layer this. So I add again. This time I will put layer is -1 because the layer goes underneath the road, so it has to be a minus. Okay, and I now have layer -1, tunnel culvert and waterway river. Once again, I run my validation. That will be totally acceptable. I don't need a node at the intersection of the road and the waterway because they are not at the same level, so they do not intersect. And lastly, let's just see. Here we go. Right. We have a waterway. So let's draw that in. I press A on my keyboard, select, add waterway river, enter, and I have a road running across it here. So select key again. Let's put my road in. Sorry, A key, and just put my road in. When drawing roads and rivers, you do not have to have them equally spaced because roads and rivers and things like that generally have a straight section with a curve, and then a curve and a straight section and a curve. So look for those straight sections and curves, and that makes it easier for you to align your road. Okay, I'm going to select this and add highway. And my highway is unclassified. Okay, right, there we have now the road and the waterway are at the same level. The road runs through the water and out the other side. That means that we have to have a node at the intersection point. So we have to have a node there. I press A on my keyboard. I put my cursor on the road and watch that the road and the river highlights at the same time. And then I add my node, escape. Now I press select on my keyboard for my S select. I now have a node that joins the two together. By selecting that node, I then add, and I have, this is a Ford, and Ford, yes. And I press OK, and I now have a Ford. Now those are the three ways of showing waterways crossing roads, or roads going over waterways, or waterways going under roads. And that is very important for both routing and for people to understand whether the weather conditions will allow them to get through or not. Right, that covers that. The next thing I'm going to go to is using your tools for drawing buildings. So I'm going to leave this file now. Let's just get rid of that one and open a new. Right. Okay, this is my hometown, Portsmouth. Some people have been very busy mapping here and doing things, but I'm going to show you that coming across something like this should not be frightening. Now, all the ways that I map here can be used on less complex buildings and normal rural buildings, but just it's slightly easier. The first thing that we do is with your tools plugins, at least with your plugins, you have created your building tool, which is very useful and very helpful. By pressing B on my keyboard, I now have my building tool. I start off by trying to get the alignment correct, so I try to find the longest length. The longest length would be this through here. So this main body here is the longest length. So I will try and use that to get my squaring up an alignment. Okay, all of these things here that you see are various items that you would find on a complex roof like this. However, that is not meaning that they're individual or different buildings. They're all part of the same building. The same as you get with changes in the shape of the roof is just culvert, gables and extensions. So bear that in mind, that you have to look at the roof shapes. One of the things that people don't quite understand is some buildings have a ridge along the roof, which gives it an apex roof, so it's sloping down either side. And that means that that is one building, not two separate buildings, because one side is in shadow and one side is in light. That's a very common mistake that people make, that they think they're actually looking at two buildings when there actually is one. So be careful of that ridged roof. It is confusing. Now, to move on, let's just try and see what we can do here. The normal way is to select the building and draw a new one. So I use my building tool and I draw the new section in like that. By selecting one building and adding to it, I keep the second building that I draw squared to the first. I hold down, I use my select key, I hold down shift and I select that building, and I still holding down the shift key, I press J, and that automatically joins in. However, this does not always work. That's an easy way of doing it, but this does not always work, because let's just say that this building here was already checked by local people, and it was designated not just a building. Yes, let's edit that, and let's just say this building was apartments. Okay, so this is apartments. Now if I add a building like that, I select the outline, I press B for building, and I want to add this section here, and I add that. I hold down, I press select, I hold down the shift key, I select that, and I press J, and immediately I have a conflict, because each time you use your building tool, it comes up with building yes, but you're trying to attach this to a building that has already got a different designation, which is apartment. So you would have to choose the value you want. That is part of the apartments. So you would click apartments and apply that. Now it has joined together and it is all apartments. But there is a better way of doing this. Let me take you back. Right, here we are, back again. Now I'm going to add this, but I'm going to do it with a difference. I want to maintain, let's just edit that back to apartments again. Okay, now I want to retain all the tagging of this building. It may be complex tagging, it may have the name, it may have a lot of other items to it, but I want to add to it. So what I use is the Extrude Tool, which is X on my keyboard. I press X on my keyboard. I want to extend this out to this point here. So I double click on the edge where I think it should be. I grab hold of that line and I just extrude it outwards. Now that now has extended this building. It is squared and it still remains apartments. So I do not have to then keep on changing or adjusting. I can then just keep adding sections. Here we are. Here's a section. This is lower than the main roof because you can see the shadow down there, but it is still a part of this building. So that is part of the footprint. I double click to put a node there, and I double click to put a node there, and I extrude that piece out. I can do it again. Here I can see there's a small section here that goes out slightly. Double click for a node and drag that out so that that is also a part of the building. And so I keep doing that. I can extrude this as well as part of the building. And I have this here, which is extrude, double click, extrude. So it works like that. Now, not all sections are a part of this building, because I look here and I can see from the pieces of ground that they are sitting on, or the little gardens in front of them. The little gardens are sectioned off from each other. So I can see that these here are, while a part of the main building, they're actually separate units. So I would draw them as separate units. I can do this simply by double clicking and extrude. So that's part of the main building there. But I'm going to do these as separate. Now, I don't want them to have the tag apartments. So I want them to have building yes, but I want them to attach on. They are all sharing walls. You can see that. So I will double click here to put a node where I think that should be. I press B on my keyboard for building. I then click, sorry, escape. I need to deselect this building. So I press escape on my keyboard. Now, having the building tool, I click on the one adjoining sharing node. I click on the other adjoining sharing node and I drag it outwards. All right. Now I have this building. I click on that and we can see here that it is building yes, it's not building apartments, but it extends outwards at the back. So I select my X tool and I extrude that outwards and I have that. Now I have a shorter section here. So once again, I double click, escape, press my B for building tool and use those two nodes to drag outwards. Now this extends outwards to the front. So I will press the extrude tool again and drag that out to the front. I can do again, press the building tool, escape, and drag it out. And so I have created all these individual buildings. They're all now adjoining buildings because they all are linked with a common wall. But they are individual buildings that are building yes, and they can be given separate addresses as is the case. So that's the way of putting together a complex building. If you have, say, a circular section on, I'm going to show you how to add that. What I would do is take the diameter of this circle. I press B for building tool. I press Alt and Z. Remember that? Alt and Z, and you can see that the cursor changes. When the cursor changes, I can then draw. If you don't want to click hard onto something, you can hold the Control key down, in which case the node does not snap to the nearest item. So hold the Control key down so that that happens. You can draw your circle, or you can attach it to the building by drawing it across. And just draw the diameter of the circle and you automatically get a circle. You then press S on your keyboard to select the circle. You hold down Shift on your keyboard to select the building and you press J. Now, once again, you have a conflict here because you have apartment and building yes. So you choose your value because that's a part of the apartments and you apply that and you have a circle arch now attached to your building. So it's not that difficult to do, simply to add an arch or circular part to a building. Right, now I'm going to move on and show you something else here. I'm not happy with this. I don't like what it's done, so I'm going to move it to one side. Oh, okay, right. One of the things that is the easiest thing to do is just to delete that and redraw this. But if we delete that, then we lose the history of this. So this person who drew that is then going to lose the fact that they actually participated in the drawing of this area. So I would rather keep the history. I first of all have a look at what is underneath here, and I see, looking again, you can see the individual gardens. So this is two separate buildings joined together, but they are of equal size here. So I will just press my building tool. Now I've still got my circle there, so I need to change that back to a square building. So I press Alt and R, and the cursor changed back to building. Now this is very handy when you are doing alternating between round buildings and square buildings. You just keep your building tool, hold down Alt key and press Z for circle. Hold down the Alt key and press R, and it changes back to a square. So you can alternate between drawing those buildings. I'm going to draw this building in now, there. Now that's the same size, but there's two buildings here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press my select tool, select that, and I'm going to hold down Shift and press T. Now, if you've got Terracer selected in your utils, in your plugins, this will come up, how to terrace a house. You can divide it into a number of segments. In this case, we're going to do 2, but you can do 3, 4, 5, however segments it needs to be. So 2 it is, and I'm going to click OK, and it automatically divides it into 2 equal sections. Okay, I now see that the entire width of this building here is goes out to that point there. So I will select this and use my X tool to extrude that outwards. Now, I want to keep the history of the first building. So I've got that selected. I hold down my Shift key and I select that one as well. Now I've got the old and the new objects selected, right? I hold down my Shift key, I hold down my Control key, and I press G. And what immediately happens is that disappears into this building. And I can see now that the author is now back in there. So the history of his drawing has been maintained in the new building. Now, how do I approach this is adjoining, and it is also attached. I'm going to use my select tool and put a node here. Right, a tool and put a node here. And then going to draw the building, but I want the building, sorry, select tool, I want the building to square up to this one. So I press that and I press my building tool and I attach a building. I have to start on the node that I want common to the other building. And then I drag it to its size. I press down my S key. I hold down the Shift and I select that so that these two are selected, and I press J. Now that has joined it up. It has got a common node. As you can see, the node is slightly larger than the corner one. That means that has joined together, but it does leave me with some spare nodes I don't need. So I will just delete that and delete that. And I now have 2 buildings attached to each other of different shapes and sizes. And one has retained the history of the previous drawing. You can continue that onwards. This is also joined together. So I press building, do the 2 adjoining nodes and drag it outwards. Use the X tool to add a node and drag that outwards. Use the X tool to drag this outwards. Okay, and we have another building which is attached. Right, now I can carry on with that. This is a very incorrect and should probably look like that. Even this is incorrect because I can see from the gardens and the front here that in actual fact these are single buildings. So that half is a building, that half is a building. So that would be even better if those were individually done as well. You can see here, this has been correctly done with individual buildings, because you can see in the back here, the individual gardens delineating the property that belongs to this building. And those are indicators of individual buildings or complexes that are joined. Right. Are there any questions at this stage, or can we move on?
There was one question by Pierre Mirelles in the chat. I quote, I thought buildings should never be connected and share a node. I thought connecting points should always be unglued. Please clarify.
Yes, all right, I can clarify that. When we are doing informal settlements or rural areas, please read the instructions carefully. In some cases, the project manager will actually say, please do not join them together because we know that they do not share common walls. It may be a case that the roofs overlap to make it look like the buildings are joined together, but this is not the case. So when we do informal settlements and things like that, we try not to join them together because this is not always the common thing. But please read the instructions carefully. However, when you get into a formal city or town like this, many of these are semi-detached or detached terraced housing of different sizes and shapes, and they do all share common walls. You can see that where the ridge of the roof runs, but it breaks at the end, and there's another ridge and there's a break at the end. So you can see that these are, let me switch this off. You can see that these are part of a single building, but divided up. There's no in-between walls here. So this is all joined together, but the gardens tell me that these are individual buildings. You can make your own decision. You can see that while this is a continuous ridge in a single line, you can actually see the join wall between the two, which is a common wall that is joining each of these. So those would be common walls and would exist. Check the mapillary photos if there are any. That will show you whether these are joined buildings or not. But in many cases, in cities and towns, you will get either individual buildings, in which case the shadow will in between them will show that they're not joined together, or there will be gaps. You can see here is a very definite gap between this building here and this building here. You can see the gap in between. So please look for that and use your judgment as well as reading the instructions as to whether they should be joined or not joined. If you are not sure whether they are joined, please show them as separate buildings. When someone comes along that has local knowledge or is on the ground and can actually ground truth the fact, they can then join them together or mark them as being joined together, in which case that can be corrected. But we working from aerial imagery are not always able to make that judgment call, and it's preferable to separate them as two individuals so that when the NGO or the company that's doing their survey can decide how many families live there, they'll rather overestimate than underestimate. I hope that might be helpful. I know it's not a hard and fast rule that I've given you, but please use your judgment call and the instructions. Right, I'm going to move on now. And we're going to go to Coro in Venezuela. And we're going to have a look at some of the other useful tools with JOSM. The first one that I want to show you here is aligning a road. When you draw them and you click to join the link the roads to each other, you sometimes get movement or displacement. If you select each of the nodes holding down your shift key and using your select key, you line up all those nodes. All I do is press L on my keyboard, L on my keyboard, and it automatically lines them up between the two end nodes. So make sure the two end nodes are in the correct alignment, and everything else in between will line up automatically. So you can straighten out a road that has been slightly adjusted and should not be adjusted. That is L on your keyboard. You can also find these shortcut keys by going up to your drop-down menus here and click on one of those, and you will see that the various shortcut keys are actually listed alongside the items that you can do, right? There's the unglue ways is G, there's the merge nodes is M, and there's quite a few others that you can learn along the way that come in very handy. Okay, but I'm going to show you now how to draw duplicate buildings. We can see all of these are the same size and the same shape, but first of all I need to identify what is the actual shape. Is this one building that has two roads, generally buildings front onto a road and front onto a road? So I'm going to zoom in and have a look, and I can see from the side of the building, I can see the green is the roof and the gray is the side of the building. This building is taller than that building, so the roof is slightly more offset here. Let me show you that. Press A. You can see the offset there. Now that is not actually the case of the building. That's not the case of the building. Here it is, and I'm going to get rid of that now, so I press delete. What has happened is that this roof is further offset because of its height. So in actual fact, these roofs actually line up, as I can see from the base footprint. So I will use my lowest building, select the building tool, press B, and draw that in. So that gives me the width of the building. I then drag it across to the end of the raised piece, but I don't include that because that's the offset. I then select the building and I drag it down to its footprint. And now that building is in its correct place. I have separated these two because I can see, let me switch that off. I can see here that there is a gap between these two buildings. So this is one building here, and that is a second building because there's no gap between here. The shadow you see here is the shadow of the higher building onto the lower roof. So this is still all one building here, but there's a separation between this, and this is a second building. So switch back on. Once again, the roof is offset to the base. So I will deselect this by pressing Escape. Press B to draw in this building. Select that and drag it down to its footprint there. Now we have the two buildings that are correctly positioned. I can use this by selecting both buildings, hold down the Shift key, use my select and select both buildings. I now can copy and paste that in wherever I go. So I hold down my Shift key and press C. I have now select. So Control, copy. Deselect that, and then I hold down Control and V, and I have exactly the same setup, and I can set it on the footprint. I then do Control V, I have the exact same setup, and I can put it on its footprint. I have the same Control V, and I can put it on its footprint. Right. So there we are, having a complete row of buildings that are all the same. However, there is one other thing that I'd like to show you. By selecting a building, Control Copy, and want to place it, Control V, but I find that it's not correctly lining up. Let's just see. Control Z, get rid of that building. If I need to, in actual fact, realign a building, I don't see one here that's offset. Okay, if I want to realign the building because it's the same size, but it's at a different angle, I can change the actual angle of that by holding down my, using my select cursor, hold down my Shift and Control key. I can then rotate it around its central axis. Can you see that? So I can then change the direction of the building so it aligns up with the building that's there. I can also resize it by holding Control and Alt, and I can drag it backwards and forwards, and that makes it bigger and smaller. So still in the select key, I can use Control Alt and make it bigger and smaller. Now this also works if you're going to copy and paste round buildings that are of different sizes. You can copy and paste the round building and just drop it in. But with, as I showed with round buildings, it's much easier just using your building tool and using the Alt Z and clicking across the diameter, and that automatically gives you a round building at the correct size. So those are alternate ways that you can do those. So let's just get rid of that. So this is now copying and pasting and resizing and re-angling, changing the direction. Do I have any more questions here? I'm just going to show you the merge and unglue tools. So if I have a building, press B, and I have these two buildings have been joined together and they should not be joined together. So I use my select key. I select the building that I'm going to separate. I hold down my Shift key and I click on the two nodes that I want to unglue. I press G on my keyboard, and I can either move those two nodes or I can move the whole building away because it's now been unglued. So that's a quick, easy way of separating buildings. There are other tools for separating rivers from boundaries and things like that. So you can do that. Plus, of course, this is a quick, easy way of separating a node, a building node that is linked to a road, which of course we all know is a no-no. Now let's just say that we decided that these two buildings are in actual fact supposed to be together. All we need to do is select the node that we want to move, hold down our Shift key, and hold the node that we want to move that to, and press M on the keyboard, and that automatically merges, so it jumps to where you want it to go. You can do that by selecting, hold down the Shift key, select the node it's going to, and press M on your keyboard, and it automatically jumps to that. Okay, that's the unglue and the merge nodes as well. So please get used to using your shortcut keys, and it will speed up your mapping considerably. Are there any questions?
Yeah, Ralph, you have one in the question and answer panel from Peter, just to repeat or demonstrate the extrude again.
All right. I'm just trying to get, you say you want me to explain the extrude tool again. Okay. Here we go. Here is a building that I'm going to use the extrude tool on. So I press B on my keyboard. I draw in the main building, and there is a small section attached to that. So I press X on my keyboard. X is extrude. In other words, it's going to move a section of the building out. So I press X on my keyboard and my cursor changes. I need to put a node at the end of this section. So I double click on the line and that puts a node in there. I need a node on this section. So I double click on the outline here and it gives me a node there. I can then grab this middle piece and just drag it outwards. So that has now extruded. It stays square. It retains the same tagging, and that's a quick, easy way of changing or altering or adding sections to a building. You can keep on doing that ad infinitum, adding little sections to make complex little shapes. Okay, any other questions? Yeah, Andrew has a question.
Yeah, Evan, why don't you type it in, and then Ralph, you actually have another one. Can you explain how to copy a building in the Q&A panel?
Sorry, I didn't get that. You broke up a bit.
Yeah, there's another question already in the Q&A panel, just to explain how to copy.
How to copy a building. Okay, yes, I've got that. Right, I am going to show that to you. I can come here. I can select one building, or I can select a couple of buildings if they are part of a consistent formation. So Shift key to select both. Okay, I've both selected. I hold down my Control key and I press C, and that will copy both of those. I deselect that by pressing Escape so that I don't have those selected. I move my cursor to where I want the new buildings to be, and I press down the Control key and press V. V for Victor, and immediately this comes up. I can then move it around to put it on its footprint, and that is done. I then press Control V again, and I have another new set, and I place it in position. So that's Control C after you have selected the building you want to copy, and Control V to paste it where you want it to go, using your select cursor to indicate where it should go. Okay, if there aren't any more questions, I can hand back to Russ. I'm going to stop screen sharing now.
Yeah, there's a question about underground physical system, but yeah, I'm not an expert on this either, but I mean, you can map like pipelines and things like that, but yeah, I think it's not really in the scope of what we're going to talk about today. If any of the panelists want to do a couple minutes on underground stuff, yeah, I think we have time. Just yeah, not something I map regularly.
Yeah, I think I can do just a short idea of what happens underground. And once again, you're now starting to play around with the layer tag, and you would certainly need to put that underground. We do have that where we have tunnels and we have underground pipelines for rivers. So we would then put at least a layer -1 to move it down below the surface of the ground, and that way you can draw other things on top of that without there being a clash. So please use the layer tools if you want something, a facility underground, but generally we prefer most things that if you can see it above ground, that's good. If there's nothing else above ground, but there is something underground, by all means show that with a layer -1 or layer -2, depending. We have, in some cases, 2 tunnels, one above the other one, but both below ground, in which case the lowest one would be layer -2, and the one above it would be layer -1. And that way you can show different levels underground as well. Okay, hopefully that will give you some indicator of how you can handle underground facilities. Back to you, Russ.
Yeah, thanks, Ralph. Just checking, make sure. Yeah, looks like we answered everybody's questions. Except, yeah, Evans. Yeah, please. We're just going to go ahead. Everybody just type their questions in. I don't want to delay trying to open the mic and all that good stuff. So yeah, just either use the question and answer panel or the chat, and we'll get to it as we go along. And without further ado, yeah, I'll hand the presentation over to Jeffrey. I think both him and I are in fairly disconnected environments right now, so bear with us as we get ready. But Jeffrey, whenever you want, go ahead and take over.
Yeah, thank you, Russ. So go ahead and share my screen. So I'm just going to quickly take us through filters and the to-do list plugin. So just to show you how to install the to-do list plugin, you have to go to Edit, Preferences, click on the plugin tab, and then you search for the to-do lists, and then click OK once you have it selected. Of course, I already have it selected on my computer, so I'll not install it again, but you just have to click OK and it will get installed. So yeah, once you install it, of course, it will appear on your Windows menu and you can use it. So I just want to download a place here and just show us how to use that. So I'm going to go to Juba in South Sudan and download an area here. All right, so yeah, what does the filters help us to do? So just make sure the windows show up. So yeah, like I mentioned, you can always add more windows here, or you can remove them either by using the shortcuts on the left-hand side or from the Windows menu. So yeah, one of the things that filters help us to do is to yeah, to filter out some things and show us one particular type of feature. So for example, if I want to see only buildings which are in this area here, that yeah, if I want to see only buildings, then I can come to my filter window here and add the filter by clicking on the plus sign and say building equals star, which is building equals all. If I submit my filter, you will see automatically some things are hidden. So there are three checkboxes on the filter. There is enable, which is E. There is H, which is hide, and I, which is invert filter. So if I check all the three, realize that it will hide everything else and show me only buildings. So that might be very useful if you are cleaning up data and you want only see a certain type of feature. I'll just show you another one, which is highways. So if I want to see only roads, then I'll make a filter which is highway equals all. Then I submit my filter and check the boxes, and then it will show me only the on the roads in my so it has hidden everything else. Now I'm just looking at only roads, and I can clearly see the road network, and I can easily fix things which need fixing. Of course, you can also categorize something. So for example, if I want to see only roads which are residential, then I'll be more specific and say highway equals residential. So if I submit that filter and check or enable hide and invert, it will hide all the other types of roads, and it will show me only highway residential. Yeah, the other way how filters will be very useful is if you combine them with the to-do list. I have my to-do list window here, but how can I use it? So let us say I want to see only amenities in this data. So I'm going to submit a filter and search for amenity. So every feature that is tagged as an amenity, I'm going to submit my filter, activate the filter here. So right now it is hiding everything else, but it's just showing me only amenities. So for example, this is a restaurant, this is a hospital, this is a school. So I may be interested in, going feature by feature and checking if the tagging is okay. So it's very useful when you are filtering data. So what I'm going to do to make sure that I select everything, I'm going to draw a rectangle here, which will select everything. But what is happening now is that when it selects the nodes and the ways. So the way to unselect node so that it selects only ways is to press Shift plus U, which is the shortcut for unselect nodes. So you can see now that it is selecting only the ways, so I can add them to my to-do list here. Now I can go on and just check. So for example, this is a church. So if you double click on a feature in the to-do list, it automatically zooms to that feature. So if I double click on the next one, so it's also showing you how many features are selected. It is showing me 0 out of 13, which means that as you finish checking one feature, for example, if I come here and my interest was to check the tagging to make sure it is okay, I can come here and mark. So once I say mark, it is now showing me 1 out of 13. So I'm done with 1 out of 13. So I can go on and check one feature by one feature, and each feature I finish, I can just click on mark and it will jump to the next. So yeah, the to-do list is very useful when you are doing like, for example, an import of features. So let us say you have health facilities data that you have got from government, and you have documented the workflow on the import wiki. Then you can use the to-do list plugin so that you check one feature by one feature. Because if you're getting data from an external source, you also want to check if it's already existing in OSM before you upload it. So the to-do list will help you to go feature by feature as you check it, and then upload it to OSM. So that's how it works. I'll just show you again how to do the unselect nodes feature. So let us say I filter out only buildings, and I want to move like building to building. I'm going first of all to clear my to-do list by right-clicking here and saying clear. So everything is gone. Now I can come here, draw the rectangle, select everything. So, but you can clearly see that it has selected everything, nodes and ways. So if you add this to your to-do list, you'll not get the desired result. So you have to unselect the nodes by pressing Shift U. So if you press Shift U, that will help you to unselect the nodes, and then you can add your buildings to the to-do list. So I can see now I've added 3,000 buildings, and I can easily, move one by one, check if everything is okay. So if you have collected like data that you're adding to each building, that's also another way how you can, clean up the data and make sure everything is okay and you have not left out anything. Yeah, so that is filters and the to-do list plugin. Of course, there are so many different filters that you can use. You can, for example, filter data by a user. You can filter data by date. You can, for example, if you want to see data that was mapped on a certain date. Yeah, there is a wiki page which has all the different filters that you can use. Yeah, so that's how you do filters and how you can use the to-do list. Yeah, back to you, Ras. If there's any questions, I can take them.
Yeah, thanks, Jeffrey. Let me check. I don't think there were any questions on that section. So, yeah, thanks again. Let's see. I guess the next thing we're going to talk about is we're going to hand it back to Michael, and he's going to take us through some conflict resolution.
Right. So share this one. Okay, so okay. You should see the first slide now. And because, well, conflict resolution is something you better prepare when no one's interfering with you. So doing that live is prone to problems. Well, conflicts, so the most important point is, well, it doesn't mean that you did something wrong. They will happen. And how does that happen? Well, a conflict in JOSM, when you upload it, typically means that the object you've modified has in the meantime been modified by someone else who happened to upload earlier. So now you want to upload changes which refer to an earlier version of that object in the database, and the database doesn't know how to do that. So the resolution is left up to you. Typically, you don't upload single objects, you upload a couple of changes which you've made on a layer. So the first thing you need to do is you need to get an overview if there is just 1 or 2 conflicts, or are that quite a lot? Because when this message pops up, there are basically two buttons: synchronize, just one of those, just the one way under consideration, or synchronize the entire data set. I would always recommend to say synchronize the entire data set, because that means it's trying to figure out if there are any further conflicts. And well, if you end up with 50 or 100 conflicts, then your better choice might be to, well, to decide that this is not your most successful day and just skip and drop that layer and start mapping again, because going through what I'm outlining right now is not real fun with 50 or 100 objects, but it's just, if it's just 2 or 3 objects, then that's well feasible. So you should press the synchronize entire data set, and after that you'll get a message like this. In this case, there was just one conflict detected. Well, that's easy then. And in order to resolve a conflict, JOSM has an own window for that. So first of all, you need to activate this conflict tab if it's not already visible. It's one of those tabs on the right side which you can activate through an entry in the Windows menu. Let me just get back to my JOSM. Yeah, there is a conflict, and then you get this conflict tab here in the lower right corner, which I'm talking about right now. So in this case, the one object in conflict is visible in that conflict window. If there are more, select one of them, or double click on one of them, or you might select it and click resolve. And then your main workhorse will appear, and this is the conflict resolution window, which looks a bit intimidating at first, but well, it has 3 columns. The left one are the nodes of the object in your local version. The right part here are the nodes which are currently in the database. And the central column is empty, because that's where we're trying to combine the best of both worlds. So you will notice that there are different colors. Green means they are the same in both versions. We don't have to worry about them. Red nodes have been added only in one version, and those with a salmon color are present in both versions, but at different positions. So when we first downloaded this way, which was a road, a highway, we added some of the bits. These are the red nodes visible down there, because, well, the green ones have always been there, the salmon ones have been there previously, and the red ones are our new addition. And when we have a look here on the right side and see what's going on in the database, we see the green part is the same, but the salmon part looks different. And here, some other user entered 5 points in between. And of course, the version in the database lacks our red nodes at the bottom. So once you understood this, you should have a better picture of your resolution strategy, which means we haven't been messing around with any of these parts here. So what we would like to do is construct a new highway, which consists, of course, of the unchanged previous nodes, of all these nodes, including the other users' contributions, because they don't interfere with ours in any way. And finally, add our additions here at the end. So then we will have an object which contains both additions, the ones from the user who was a little bit quicker than we, and our own ones. And to this end, we can select parts from these 2 columns, and the arrow buttons will then help us in combining them to a new highway. So what we do is here, we say, well, we can accept the complete version from the server, because we didn't interfere with any of these existing nodes. And so the lowest button simply does that. It says copy all nodes from the right side, from the way in the database, into the merged version we're about to construct. So if that were not the case, we could simply select parts of that with a mouse and then use some of the other buttons to copy parts of these nodes here. But we said, well, we can use the complete way in here, so let's do it this way. After we've done that, the merged version, our sandbox here where we are playing around, now contains all the nodes from the current version within the database. And now the next job is we have to simply add the nodes which we here added locally to the way at the end. Their position does not interfere with any of these nodes, so that's perfectly okay to simply copy them over at the end. That means we select them first with a mouse, which turns them blue. Just the ones which have been shown in red here, we select them with the mouse so that they are visible in blue. And then we've got a couple of options because we must tell this window where to add them to the merged version. The topmost button would add them right at the beginning, which of course is wrong. We will select the other available button, which says add them at the end. Or if we would have to mix them in somewhere in between, we could select one of those nodes, and then the other options would be either insert them immediately below or above them, the selected node. So and once we've done that, we've got a new version, this merged version here, which contains nodes from both worlds in the way we just constructed them. Once we're ready, just forgot to mention that you will have to click on that freeze button. Otherwise, you cannot apply any resolution. With freeze, you tell that freeze doesn't do anything in the database. It just tells the window, well, we're done with that. You can revert to that state. That's no problem because then the freeze button turns into unfreeze. And if you unfreeze it, you're basically back to my previous slide where you can add nodes, or you could also delete nodes from here if you've seen you've done something wrong. But we're happy with this version. And then once we're happy with that, we can say apply resolution, and apply resolution will get us a layer which contains this modified state. And then we can upload this layer, well, and can only hope that not someone has now gotten into our way again. Otherwise, we'd have to reiterate the process. But so what I want to show you with this presentation is simply this window is not meant to intimidate you. It's something which happens pretty often, particularly if you added highways in a tasking manager project, because if it's a main road which extends across a couple of task squares, it's highly probable other people are editing it at the same time than you do. Might also happen in mapping buildings, if you map a building which well spans across two tasks. So then not unlikely that the two people mapping in those tasks edit it at the same time. Just means synchronize the data set, get an overview of what's going on. If it's just a couple of conflicts, go through them one after the other. Have a look at this window. If you can see, well, it's pretty easy. Someone else added some nodes far away from where I did that. It's easy to construct a combined way which contains the best of both worlds, and then simply freeze that, apply the resolution, and after that, upload that to the server. I hope this little presentation could demystify something about conflicts and conflict resolution. And well, fortunately, most of the time we will be mapping without conflicts, but this should be a little guideline what to do if that mishap happens to you. So that's basically what I've prepared for this. Do we have any questions at this point?
Thanks, Michael. There is a question from Caleb about uploading. Maybe what I'll have, if we can either have Michael or Ralph, if you can kind of prepare to answer this one after I'm done, because I think, yeah, we're getting close to the 2-hour mark here. So I'm going to do like my crash course of relations, and then Yeah, Caleb, it could be a combination of things. So the question is basically, he's having an error while uploading change sets. So yeah, it could be either your username and stuff is in there incorrect, or it's there's some settings that you can change that alter the way uploads happen on JOSM. So yeah, I don't know if Michael or Ralph, if either one of you are prepared to talk about that, or we can get to it at the end. I just don't have JOSM running, or else I would try to do it now. And that was the only question I saw. So,
well, it would help if, Caleb, you could enter the kind of error you receive in one of those windows, either the chat or the Q&A, so then we can respond a bit more specifically.
I think
yeah,
Caleb's problem is quite easy to resolve. He may have an error in the mapping, that there may be overlapping buildings or duplicated nodes or something like that, in which case JOSM would flag up an error when you try to save your work, and it would like you to fix that before you save your work. So I can handle that afterwards.
yeah, exactly. Caleb, just if you can text chat with those two and see if we can resolve it. Otherwise, yeah, at the end of the presentation, we can dive into it a little bit more. That's not, again, not like a topic we have prepared, but yeah, we can try to work through it with you. Okay, let me bring up my slides. And like I said, I'll probably just do a real sort of crash course through relations. And getting into it, yeah, again, I'm in the Philippines, disconnected internet or unstable internet. So instead of trying to walk through this live on JOSM, I'm just going to do these slides and try to give you at least the ability to kind of feel confident of editing relations and knowing a little bit of what you're going to get into when you either create or edit existing ones. So the first thing is there's three kind of obvious ways to grab hold of a relation and start editing it. You'll see, the panel on your right, and of course sometimes you might not have like the relations window open, so you might not have all of these, but if you're touching an object or have an object selected that's part of a relation, it'll actually show up in the tags. So you can see that one that says member of, it'll say member of whatever relation that belongs to. The relations panel itself is kind of the obvious one towards the bottom. And then if you have a relation selected, it'll also show up in the selection panel. The simplest relation I can think of is kind of the courtyard example. So, if you have a building that has a courtyard or a hole in the middle, that's done by creating a relation. So you have the outer part of the building and then the inner part, which is the piece that's cut out. So yeah, as you can see in this example, the relation is selected, so it's in the relations panel, and you can see that there's two ways, and in this case they're like non-tagged 4-node ways, and that's let me see if I can highlight over here. Let me get out the pointer. Yeah, so that's kind of this stuff over here. So 0 kind of meaning it has 0 tags, and then each piece is made up of 4 nodes. You can see in this case, right across the field here, there's another, basically the same example. It's not a courtyard inside of a building, but we have a pitch. I think it's like a soccer field in this case, inside of a running track. So kind of the same thing, you can use these multi-polygons to represent features inside of features, so to speak. You can create new relations by just clicking the little plus sign in the relations box there. We'll come back to this in a little bit. There's some other ways to do it as well. Yeah, the first thing probably when you anytime you're going to edit a relation, especially large relations and like coastlines or long highways, those kind of things, is make sure that you download all the members. It's not necessarily that you have to if you're just kind of editing a piece that's in your section, but a lot of times, kind of as Michael was saying, you know, you'll get conflicts really easy when you're dealing with these kind of giant features because they span an entire project or just, you know, span a large area, so other people may be working on them you know, far away but still touching the same features that you are, and instead of having to, you know, deal with it on upload and potentially having an error on upload, just go ahead or I typically just go ahead and download all the members when I begin. One of the reasons why we have relations, I think actually originally when OpenStreetMap was first created, you know, talking 2004 to like 2005 or 6, maybe it was 2007 when they added relations to the database, was because they started hitting a limitation on how many nodes there can be in a way. So the database actually has a 2,000 node maximum to like stuff like a road or a river, those kind of things. So in this case, you can see this is Highway 285 in the state of Colorado in the United States. It's made up of 587 segments, not necessarily because all of them have 2,000 nodes, but because you also have, you know, all the bridges and things. So, you know, you come across a river and you have to split out the road and create a bridge, and then, you know, suddenly your one segment road becomes 3, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, you can imagine that, especially like an interstate road across the entire US is going to be, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of segments, dual carriageways, all of those good things. What we typically call these are super relations. So we're talking about relations of relations. Not to try to confuse you, but you know, the super relations are also useful for things like these interstate roads or multi-state roads, because maybe, like in this case, Highway 285 actually exists in the state of Colorado, it exists in the state of New Mexico, I think all the way down, I think maybe even into Texas, I think is what it's showing there. So you have kind of each section of Highway 285 as its own relation. That's the state section, and then to represent the entire road, you need a relation of all of those relations. So you can see in the side over here, you know, it's basically 10, you know, it's a super relation and then 9 regular relations that make up this entire road. But if that isn't complicated enough, there's boundaries. So whether you're talking about like national forest boundaries is the example here, you know, some of the boundaries, and you know, this could be district boundaries or political boundaries, you know, that sometimes their edge is a road, and then, you know, maybe the east side is a highway, the north side is a river, the west is a mountain range, you know, all of those things that make up the boundary of this political boundary. Coastlines are another sort of very complicated super relation boundary thing that, you know, you definitely want to be very careful with when you're editing coastlines, because you've maybe seen it where suddenly in the rendering, like a whole country looks like it's underwater, and that's because somebody broke the relation that creates that boundary between land and water, and then the renderer doesn't know what to do. they've done some technical things to make that happen less often or less noticeable, but it still does happen. So yeah, definitely be careful when you're touching those coastlines. So let's step back to the simpler relation again, talking about that courtyard. Again, one of these things is a inner relation or inner boundary, and one is a outer boundary. So you have 2 polygons, and what we're doing in this case is instead of adding the tags to the 2 polygons, like in the case of the track and field, you would actually have the tags on the polygons themselves. You would have the track tag as the track, and the pitch tag as a pitch, and then the relation. In this case, because you have basically an inner and outer wall, you add the tags to the relation itself. So yes, again, I'm kind of, again, this is crash course in this stuff, and hopefully I don't confuse you too much. It is one of the more complicated things when it comes to, especially the database of OpenStreetMap. This just shows you, like, if we do things correctly, then we have this loop shown on the graphic there. So, in this case, this is back to the forest polygon boundary, and you can see that this boundary is actually a complete loop, so you can expect it to work correctly when it comes to rendering and those kind of things. Looking at a kind of a simpler one, this is the middle fork of the South Platte River, which I guess I picked a sort of confusingly named river, but there's 3 forks. There's a north, middle, and south fork of this river, and in this case, we're down kind of on the bottom of the graphic down here is the river itself, and again, it became this had to be pieced together with a relation because there's places where it's dammed, there's places where it's just really windy, so you hit that 2,000 node limit pretty quickly. So yeah, again, you're kind of just looking for a real sorry, I meant to go to the next one. So yeah, you're just looking for, a real simple one. You can see in this case, they're actually not like lined up correctly, but it's just because they were misordered. One was showing as I think the top was on the bottom or vice versa, or the west was on the east, or one or the other. So now you can see that, a linear feature like a river, when it's properly related, will have a nice linear representation in the graphic there. Yeah, just some tips and tricks or some well-wishing to those of you that are going to get involved with editing large relations, such as a complex highway system, those kind of things. My best advice is just, again, make sure you download all the segments so you're not missing something as you're looking through. Examine each segment piece by piece. Maybe, as we saw in the last example, maybe it's just misordered, and you can drag things into order. Sometimes the sort will help. So you can use the automated sort, but sometimes it just doesn't. So there's just a lot to it. In this case, like the roll can be wrong, and this happens a lot with highways. So what probably happened is somebody split this highway into a dual carriageway, but didn't switch the roles between backwards and forwards. So yeah, here it's kind of showing that, you know, it's broken because there's like too many forward segments in one little section. So yeah, again, crash course. Hopefully that helps at least, you know, get you a little less afraid to touch this stuff. I mean, yes, you can break things like coastlines, but sometimes that's part of the learning. And you know, hopefully it's not a horrible learning experience. But yeah, relations are just a very complex kind of component of OpenStreetMap, but they're sort of essential and now, you know, part of the database that you will eventually come across. So with that, yeah, thanks everybody for coming. I know we're went over 2 hours, so yeah, for those of you still sticking around, thanks for bearing with us. Did we get Caleb's question answered?
Hi, no. I want to address Caleb's question just quickly. We're not quite sure what error he has, but I'm going to share my screen and just show him what kind of error we're getting. If he can confirm that's what he's got, then that will sort his problem.
Yeah, and I guess if, you know, the rest of you don't necessarily have to hang out unless you're also curious about what the error issue is.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, right, here's what we've got. I'm going to create an error on my screen. So I'm going to click B for my building tool. Right, it's not, okay, I'm going to download an area. Right, now click B on my building tool, zoom in. If I've got two buildings that are joined like overlapping, then what will happen is when I try to save that, is that my validation tool will pick that up as an error. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and upload that onto OpenStreetMap by clicking there, and it comes up with a warning that says suspicious data found. It tells me that I've got crossing buildings, and that is something that I want to fix before I upload. So I don't press continue to upload. I cancel the upload and I go to my validation panel, and it tells me that the warning is there. It tells me that I have crossing buildings. So I open up the crossing buildings. I click on that and zoom to the problem. So that was right click on that and zoom to the problem. And I can see I've got two overlapping buildings. If I stop those buildings from overlapping, right, that's not really how it should be, but yes. If I stop those from overlapping, then what I can do is when I go to upload, it now does not give me that error. It takes me straight to the upload, and I can add that to OpenStreetMap. So you will get an error if there are problems in the mapping that you have done that you're trying to upload. Hopefully that will help some of you if you come across that. and please fix any of the errors. One way of avoiding that happening is to actually run your validation tool to check if there are any errors in your work before you upload onto OpenStreetMap. And please try and fix any of the errors that are there in your mapping so that you won't have that error come up.
Yeah, I was just trying to think of what actual errors. What about like two roads crossing without a node? Is that an actual error? Because yeah, I just
oh yes. Yes, those are things that happen. You could have two roads that are crossing. You can have a building that is linked to a road with a single node. You can have duplicate nodes where a building has had multiple nodes on top of each other. You can have roads which overlap or close on each other. You can have buildings which overlap itself, so you have a way which says it's crossing over itself. So all of those things will come up as an error which would be wanting to be fixed before you do your download.
okay. Thanks for help. Yeah, Caleb, I'm not sure if you're still online, but let us know if that didn't answer your question, and we can definitely take more questions if people have them. I know it's getting not really. It's 8:15 here, so I'm okay. Feels later, but that's probably because it's raining so hard. But it looks like we've answered all the other questions. So unless people have questions, oh, here we go. Are there any projects gathering OSM and OGC? I guess, yeah, can you further explain? Because, I mean, we have, like, I'm pretty sure all of us use QGIS for a variety of things. So, yeah, is there like a project in mind that you have? Yeah, Abdurrahman, when you're, or if you want to expand on that, in the meantime, there are some, like, our Indonesia office actually helped design and build InnoSafe, which is a plugin for QGIS that allows you to do some hazard analysis stuff, but it also built into it has the ability to grab data from OSM. So, you know, you kind of have to provide your own hazard models, but you can just, you know, kind of through the NSA plugin grab OSM data as like your feature set that's you know, tells you whether or not things are inundated or you know, impacted by whatever the hazard model you have. So that's, yeah, one project I can think of off the top of my head, but there may be others. Yeah, and if there's no other questions, then we will go ahead and stop the recording. And yeah, I try to get this done within, you know, a few days. Sometimes it takes it a little longer. Just depends on how quickly it processes, and then you know, what my next couple days looks like. So I'll try to get this up on YouTube probably by midweek, I would say at the latest. So anybody that missed parts or wants to watch it again, or yeah, share it with people, it should be up, yeah, say by Wednesday or so. Oh, and I guess, does anybody else have the YouTube channel handy? I think it's just YouTube. Is it YouTube/users/howtoassume.org, I think? No, just youtube.com/howtoassume. Yeah, thanks again to the panelists, Michael, Ralph, Jeffrey,